Somebody asked me in a comment about my potting mix, and so I thought that's a really good opportunity to do a whole post about potting mixes and raising advanced seedlings and what I use to pot things up in. I plant just about everything, in fact probably everything, out into the garden as advanced seedlings. It gives me an opportunity to maximise the use of my limited garden space in this little retro suburbia garden, because plants can spend like a third of their life on the potting bench, not using up garden space. It gives me an opportunity to economise on water. I need a zucchini that I'm going to plant out at this stage pretty soon now, today maybe. I'll plant it out with all the soil that's in the pot with it. So if I upend it out of the pot, you can see it will hold together, and I can just dump that whole thing into a hole in the garden, pull the soil in around it, and that's it. This also allows me to seed the garden regularly with fertilisers. So most of my fertiliser use is concentrated in these pots. I do top dress the garden beds with compost every so often, but this is where most of the fertiliser I use in the garden goes. This is some carrots that I'm going to put out into the garden today that have been raised in a pot. See, it's a fairly big pot. What's that, 6 inches deep? And I'll plant them out as a set, complete with their potting mix. So the potting mix is fairly rich because it's going to go, it's one of the ways I add fertiliser to the garden all the time. This is the potting mix that was used in there and that I used to both germinate seedlings and germinate seeds and raise seedlings. It's a mixture of composted soil out of the chook pen, which, because we're in Coffs Harbour, is fairly sandy but also very full of organic matter, and cracker dust to give it a bit of structure, so it's and a bit of drainage, and worm castings. This is the cracker dust I use. It's a mixture of the fine pebbles and the dust. We just get this from the local landscaping supply shop. They give us one of those great big plastic tubs for $2 or $3. It's cheap as. It's mixed with the compost from the chook pen, as I said, but also these worm castings. This is worm castings out of the worm farm, and they have a lot of eggshells in it because that's where we put the eggshells. And that just is a way of incorporating worm castings into the garden all the time. So there's lots of ways to make seed raising mix. What I like about this one is that it's got all the macronutrients, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, the NPK. It's also got nice rich mineral mix from the cracker dust or crusher dust, and our soils here tend to be quite mineral poor. A lot of Australian soils are mineral poor. It's got trace elements in it because we feed the worms on seaweed occasionally, and worms produce lots of the trace elements in their worm castings anyway. It's fine enough to raise little seeds like carrots in it, and which only need like a covering that thick on them. It's rich enough to raise seedlings to a good advanced stage, so that tall, 6 inches or more tall, so that I can save a lot of garden space by raising them to that level. And it's cheap. Like, most of the ingredients we're producing ourselves from the chook made compost or the worm castings. It's a way of adding bulk organic matter regularly to the soil without it costing us any real money.